Today, we're diving into a really fascinating idea based on work by Wilke Carvalho and Andrew Lampinen that kind of flips decades of research on the human mind on its head.
So here's the big question at the heart of it all. For so long, the assumption in science has been, if you wanted to understand something complex, you have to simplify it. But what if that very act of simplifying is making us miss the most important parts of how we actually think? And that's our promise for this explainer. You're going to see exactly why leaning into this messiness could be the key to a much deeper, much more accurate picture of cognition.
All right, so to really get this, we first have to talk about a core problem that cognitive science has been wrestling with for a while. You could call it the laboratory paradox. And on the surface, this makes total sense, right? If you want to study memory, you give people a clean list of words. If you're studying decision-making, you give them a simple, clear choice. The whole goal is control. You're trying to strip away all of the random, messy variables of real life so you can zoom in on just one mental process. But here's the big what if. What if, by getting rid of all that real-world complexity, we're not actually studying how the mind works in general, but instead how it works in this very strange artificial bubble that it almost never finds itself in? And that question has led to a growing worry in the field.
And this growing concern? Yep, it has a name. It's called a crisis of generalizability.
Okay, so this is absolutely crucial. Generalization is basically the whole point of doing science. You want what you find in your controlled experiment to actually apply out in the real world. But more and more researchers are finding that when it comes to the mind, that leap from the lab to life, well, it often falls short. This slide just lays out the gap perfectly, doesn't it? I mean, there is a world of difference between memorizing a sterile list of objects and actually trying to find your keys in your cluttered house when you're late for work. The lab task isolates one tiny skill, but the real-world version requires you to juggle that skill with perception, attention, and movement, all in a dynamic, unpredictable setting. So, this is where it gets really interesting. What happens when scientists actually start to close that gap and make their experiments a little more, well, messy? The results are pretty mind-blowing. It turns out all that real-world context that researchers try so hard to eliminate, it's not just noise. It's actually a critical part of the signal, and it can fundamentally change how we think and how we act. Just take a look at this. The difference is staggering. When people just read a text description of the famous trolley problem, only about 10% say they'd push someone to save 5 others. But put them in an immersive VR simulation where it feels real, where they have to act, that number shoots up to 65%. It shows this huge gap between an abstract moral choice and a visceral, in-the-moment action. And it's not just us humans. This study with mice is just astonishing. In a typical, simple lab setup, it took the mice about 10,000 tries to learn a basic choice. But when they were put in a complex labyrinth that was more like their natural environment, they pretty much mastered it in about 10 tries. That's a learning rate about 1,000 times faster. It really suggests our simple lab tasks might be seriously underestimating what we're all capable of. Okay, so if the problem is that the real world is too messy for our traditional methods, what do we do? Well, the proposed solution involves bringing in a powerful new ally, artificial intelligence. And this is the core of the whole new approach. It's not about giving up on controlled experiments. It's about upgrading our tools. It means combining richer, more realistic experiments, like that VR scenario, with the incredible power of modern AI, building models that can actually handle all that mess and complexity. I love this analogy because it just clicks. The old-school lab experiment is like testing a car engine all by itself on a bench. Yeah, it's useful, but it tells you nothing about how the car will handle a sharp turn or drive over a bumpy road. To see what the whole system can really do, you've got to put it on the racetrack, that messy, complex, real-world environment. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the idea is for cognitive science to borrow some of the key strategies that have made modern AI so incredibly successful. So this approach borrows 3 big ideas from the AI playbook. First, making research way easier to reproduce and share, so everyone can build on each other's work much faster. Second, focusing on generalizability from the start, building models that can handle lots of different tasks, not just one specific thing. And finally, creating shared benchmarks, these big dynamic test suites that let us challenge our models and really measure progress as a field. So when you put all of this together, what's the end game? What's the ultimate goal here? Well, it's about building a more complete and, frankly, a more honest science of the human mind. And just to be super clear, this isn't about throwing out everything we've learned from those simple experiments. They're still incredibly valuable for understanding specific, isolated parts of the mind. This new approach is all about adding the racetrack to the engine test,
building that crucial bridge between the lab and real life.
This quote from the source paper really says it all. The mission is to stop studying our mental abilities in a vacuum. It's about building theories that can explain how those abilities actually work together as a whole system, navigating the messy, unpredictable, and amazing complexity of the real world.
So in the end, it really comes down to this. By finally accepting that the mess isn't just noise we need to get rid of, but is actually a vital piece of the puzzle, we can build a cognitive science that's more powerful, more useful, and a lot more true to how we all experience the world. And that leaves us with a final thought to take away. Think about it for a second. Think about a big decision you've made. How much of that choice was a simple, clean calculation versus something that was shaped by the rich, emotional, and messy context of that real moment? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.